welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about computer security, and specifically the focus will be on two-factor authentication, or also known as 2FA. But before we get into the details of all of that, just a little plug. There's this website called darknetdiaries.com, and if you're interested in the subject of computer security, this journalist, he interviews people, he finds people you just never would hear stories about, from the NSA to true hackers in the dark web to military to nation state things taking place. So really great website if you want to do a deep dive into computer security and how a lot of things work that we've never would have heard about probably from any other source, or very few sources. Anyway, Darknet Diaries, check it out if you're interested. Anyway, let's dig into this video and what we're here to talk about. So, passwords. Passwords aren't protection in 2020. On this website, it kind of talks a bit about the problem with passwords. I'm just going to list off some of these statistics, and this is recent, right? So 65% of people reuse passwords across multiple websites, and you're one of them. And 80% of the data breaches that took place in 2019, just a few years ago, they were caused by password compromise. And you can have a weak password, you can have, even if it's a strong password and someone gets access to a website through some other means, they're able to hack into some computer network because they didn't configure things right, and they get a copy of a list of usernames and passwords through a bunch of effort. And this has happened many times. Once they get a password, chances are you have it used somewhere else, and they're going to get access to your account on multiple websites. So passwords just aren't cutting it anymore, even strong passwords, because there's just a ton of different ways that hackers can get a hold of it. So what can we do? Well, here, looking at the NSA website, oftentimes they publish these articles and news briefings and alerts about things that citizens can do to keep themselves secure in the cyber world. And this one is the top 10 cybersecurity mitigation strategies. Now, there's a bunch of things they mention here, but in the top 10 we have transition to multi-factor authentication. Very important. That's even in their top 10. And it should be, I would say, one of your top items. In 2021, with a lot of people working from home and a lot of things being remote because you can't get out there because of all this pandemic stuff, one of the simplest things you can do is add a second factor to your online accounts for the websites that support it. Now, if you want to know about all these other items in the top 10, I have made a video on this other YouTube channel, Prince George Technology Group, and the talk is called Best Practice to Follow to Protect Your Home or Small Business. And I go into those top 10 and a bunch of other things. It's an hour and a half long, so it's not short, but kind of a deep dive that I gave back at the end of last year. Or maybe it was even the year before. It says a year ago anyway. So that's something to consider. But let's talk about what is two-factor authentication. So here we're on this website called the Secret Security Wiki. And essentially two-factor authentication, also known as 2FA, is a specific type of multi-factor authentication. So it requires two separate identifying factors. So if you think about it, a username and password is something you know. So the password is something you know, it's a secret. And the second factor, what they typically call it, is something you have. So a person can go virtually onto a website or go somewhere and find out what your password is, but if they can't get a hold of something you have, then they still can't hack your account. So that's the idea of two-factor authentication in a very simple nutshell. Now, there's different ways of implementing two-factor authentication. One of the common ways that's been around for a number of years is using your text messaging on your cell phone. So using your cell phone's text message functionality. And there's a problem called Simswapping, or another one is called Simjacking. And essentially what that is through social engineering and other means like that. That's not the only way, but hackers can essentially take over your cell phone account. And if they can take over your cell phone account just by calling up the telephone company and convincing them, or the cell phone company, convincing them that they're you, and the cell phone company gives them access to your cell phone account, now they can log in with your username and password and get the text message sent to their phone, even if it's temporarily, and they can get into your account. Now, simjacking has been used for other more lucrative means. What you can see in this article, woman's phone hijacked in apparent SIM swapping. There's just multitudes of these. Fraud alerts, SIM swap, port scam. Real estate professionals have had a lot of problems during this previous pandemic year, just because it's a lot tougher for them, and you can't always do things in person. And so because their number is publicly accessible, they're a big target for SIM swapping. You can see here on one of the local cell phone providers here in Canada, Telus, SIM swap scam. They even have an FAQ about what they're doing to try to stop it from happening, but you know what? It still happens en masse. Here's another article talking about how to protect your bank accounts from SIM swapping. And it's just a frequent problem that happens. So if you're considering, you watch this video and say, I want to turn on two-factor authentication for the websites that I use to protect my account, make sure if they offer a way of doing two-factor authentication without text messaging, like using an authentication app or a hardware key, I would pick the authentication app or hardware key always instead of the text message solution. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. So you can see here on Information Security Buzz, SMS-based two-factor authentication is notoriously weaker compared with physical security keys or authenticator apps. I already talked about that. So what does it look like? So this is a very simple picture. You have your username and your password. And if you've configured your account, and if the website supports it for two-factor authentication, you'll get a second screen, and it'll ask you for like a 6-digit number. Now, if you've set it up through SMS, then what'll happen is it'll send a text message to your cell phone, and then you have to enter in that number. But this screen here is showing an authenticator app, and this is the Google Authenticator. And this is, one line for every website that you've registered two-factor authentication. And this is a 6-digit number, and it changes every 30 seconds. So this is the first thing here is something which is your user account and password. And then the second thing is something you have, which is either a hardware key or one of these authentication apps that you've installed on your cell phone. Now, one thing to note is if you use just the Authenticator app on its own and you're not using something called the hardware key, then the information of that second factor is stored on the cell phone, on your phone. So if your cell phone dies or you lose it or gets stolen, you're not going to be able to get into your accounts. So we're going to cover what you can do to protect yourself against that, but I just wanted to point that out. So this is sort of a quick example showing that. So now let's take a look at a real example. So this is an open source application I wrote for volunteer fire halls, and some of the local ones in the area I live use this. So I'm going to enter information about what I know. My account information. This is on my local web server here, so there's nothing important that you're seeing here. So let's say I log in. So I've logged in, and I do not have two-factor authentication. So, a website might look something like you go into your user account section and you edit your information. And here there's this checkbox that says two-factor login. So I'm going to turn this on. And here I get a QR code, but I also get a secret key, which is this thing down here. And what it's saying is, you go ahead and put this information into your Authenticator app or hardware key, and then enter the validation code to make sure you've done it right. So over here, I have this Yubikeys Authenticator app. It's stored in my It's installed on my desktop, but you can install any authenticator app on your cell phone. Doesn't matter which one you use. They all have different features, and I'm not going to cover which one to use, but I will say the Google Authenticator is pretty good. I use Yubico because I use hardware keys, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So here, let's say I want to add this key. So I'm going to click the plus sign, and the app automatically detected that there's a QR code on the screen, and it's pre-populated some of the information. The issuer, which is normally like the website name, and then the account, and that's the account name that you're using to log in to the website. And these two fields are just text fields to help you identify in the list of all the two-factor authentication codes you have. It'll show you which website it's for. So you can edit these and whatever, but behind the scenes it's storing this secret key, which is important. So let's say for some reason you can't scan in that QR code. Then what you would do is you still go add, and then you just go, how do we do this? I'm going to go, there's a way to do this manually. Yeah, it's going to do it like this. There's a way to do this manually, and it just pops up this same screen, and you just have to type in everything manually. Now, one thing that I'm going to talk about is I use a hardware key, and we'll get into the details about how these things work. This is called a Yubikey, and you'll see here on the screen it says require touch. So if I'm using this app is meant to work with this hardware key, what it means is I have to touch this button in order and type in the code in order for it to work. So it's just another layer of security. But just to talk about how this part works, so I open either Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, or whichever one. I'm using Yubico. I click the button that lets me add one. And if it's your cell phone, you will scan that code. They'll have a button saying scan QR code, and then it'll pre-populate it just like this. And you just click add. And now, if I take a look here, it's added an entry here. So it's asking me to enter the validation code to make sure I've done it right. So I'm going to double click this, and that's going to copy that code into the clipboard, and I'm just going to paste over here and click verify, and there you go. Two-factor authentication has been enabled, and it's going to kick me out and force me to log in. And now, this time, when I go to log in, I enter the thing that I know, and it's going to ask me for something that I have to have. And in this case, here's this code, and Bob's your uncle. I'm logged in with two-factor authentication. So there is something to mention. So not all, two-factor authentication, even using an app, is nothing is 100% foolproof. And this article here talks about don't run two-factor authentication apps on these smartphones. And they just go down and they talk about, there's the weakest link is always a device that you don't keep up to date. So if you have like an old cell phone or some old Chinese cell phone that doesn't get updates frequently, phones like iPhone and Pixel phones and even a lot of the Samsung phones, they get frequent updates. They're larger companies and they typically take security a bit more seriously. And it's important because the apps on the phone can get hacked. And that's what, some of these things, some of these articles, I think this one, Android malware can steal Google Authenticator 2FA codes. And so I just mentioned it's an extra step beyond your password, but it's not foolproof. But something that's even better than just installing an Authenticator app, which stores all these secret codes, is a hardware key. Now this one is called like a Yubikey from that company that I mentioned before. Google sells a product called Titan Key, which is a similar kind of thing. They're called hardware keys. And if we look here on Yubico's website, they have a number of different styles of keys. These top ones are like full-size keys that have that little button in the middle, which when you plug it in it can light up, and you can touch that as an extra step of security if you decide to configure it that way. And these smaller ones are like nano-sized keys. They're literally as small as they look. They're just big enough to fit into the slot. And that's if you're like an IT person, you just want to leave it plugged into your keyboard and not worry about somebody bumping into it and breaking the key. So they have all these products, but they all do a similar thing. This second one here has a lightning port on one side and USB-C on the other. The one that I have here is this, and basically it has 3 keys in one. It has the USB-C port, it has near field communication, so I don't have to plug it into my cell phone. I can just hold it close, and it can wirelessly trigger the authentication app and send the keys to that app that way. And then there's, what are the 2? USB-C, near field communication, and of course you can use these little adapters that I got from Amazon, which essentially this goes from USB-C to normal USB-A. So I can just plug that into my computer, that if I don't have a USB-C port, I can just use an adapter. So it gives me 3 ways of using the key. Anyway, the reason that these are so cool is one of the shortcomings of just installing an app on your cell phone is, what if your cell phone dies? What if the battery dies? What if someone steals your phone? Or what if it just fails, right? We've all had that. You break the screen or you break the phone. Now all the codes are on the phone, and what are you going to do to log into your website, right? That's a weak point. So one of the cool things about these hardware keys is I buy these in pairs. And when I showed you the step there, when I went to register that QR code in this Yubikey or Yubico Authenticator app, once I plug the key in, now I already have my main key plugged into the keyboard here, and that's where all these values are getting saved for every website that I save. It's getting saved on the key. And so when I unplug the key, my computer can die, my cell phone can die, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't even worry about battery power. It's on a USB key. Now what you can do is get 2 of these keys, and when we get to that screen where it says register the key, I can scan it. I can plug a key in, scan it on the first key, don't enter the verification code yet, pull out the key, put in the second key, scan it, and now I have it on both keys. And one of them is a backup. I'd put it in a safe somewhere or whatever, and that's a backup in case I lose or damage the first one. So I still have that second one. And the cool thing is, it's not susceptible to those cell phone hacks. So even if someone compromises your cell phone, they can't get access to the key, which is why, like nation states and CIA and NSA and like high security military and all these people use keys like this. I'm sure they use more than that, but this is a simple way that you can protect yourself. So even if hackers get access to passwords, they need that extra step. They need something that you have. So they'll have to break into your house or do something crazy to get a hold of your account. And that's just going to eliminate you off the list of, hackers just don't want to spend that much work. So two-factor authentication is really great, but hardware keys takes it another step. So let's continue looking at this. And, it's not just what I showed you that these keys support. So yes, they'll store those codes on the key, which is really cool. But the other thing that they will do is that these keys allow you to create a secondary configuration. So you can use a piece of software from the website, and you can say, if I long press this middle button, if I hold it for 5 seconds, I want to do a custom action. So you can have it, let's say you use a password manager like LastPass or Bitwarden or whatever it is that you use as your master password app. And oftentimes those kind of apps require a master password, and then they will fill in passwords for all your websites. So you can configure this. When you long press it, it'll send the master password through the keyboard to that website. And so you can use this key for your main password that unlocks your password manager, which then fills in your account details. And then the key can also be used for your second factor. So it's really awesome in terms of the things that it supports. Now another step is FIDO U2F, or something called FIDO2. They have a number of security protocols that they support, which are up and coming, which are like passwordless logins, which Microsoft and Google and a number of others support. We'll talk about that in a sec. But just to say, even these keys, like the Google Titan security key, the Yubikeys key, there are ways that people can attack them. Now they're crazy what they have to do. They have to spend $12,000 in equipment, and they have to be able to steal the physical key from you and do all kinds of things. So I just want to point out they're not foolproof. And just to mention that multi-factor authentication isn't the do-all and end-all. In the SolarWinds attack that we've heard about, multi-factor authentication was bypassed. But that was a nation state doing that attack. So unless a nation state's going to come after you, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have this problem. So let's talk about FIDO2 passwordless authentication. This is pretty cool. So I've registered on this demo website that Yubikeys lets you, they demo you how this works. So let's say you have your typical username and password. I've already pre-registered on this demo with my hardware key, and I created a dummy account. So let's say I log in and take a look. So instead of worrying about getting a code from an app, it says use your security key, insert it, and touch it. So now it's already plugged into my keyboard. I'm going to touch the button, and boom, I'm in. That is the second factor. So this is a new standard that's being rolled out, which is very, very convenient. So unless someone gets a hold of my actual key, there's no way they're going to be able to hack my account, at least not through a 2FA method. So that just quickly showed how FIDO2 works. So there's a lot of other things I could say, but I just wanted to kind of cover the bases really quick to explain what two-factor authentication is, explain how these Yubikeys work, talk about, one of the common problems with just using a normal app on your cell phone. If you use these hardware keys, it takes the risk off from you having a damaged cell phone or something. The keys are stored on there. You can plug these keys into basically everything. A computer, a laptop. You can use near-field communication on your wife's cell phone. All you have to do is install the Yubikeys Authenticator app. Just hold the NFC to the back of it. It'll pop open the app, and there's your codes. So there's just so many different ways that you have access to your second factor with these hardware keys. It's fantastic. It's quite secure. And it's just a way in 2021 to protect all of your online accounts from the typical hacker accounts. So hopefully this video has helped you guys out. If you have, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more great content. Put comments down below if you have any additional things, questions, comments. Appreciate that, and have yourselves a great day.